This is Just Listen, hosted by George. Today is January 12th, 2026. Okay, so we're churning into the new year, so I'm very excited. Also, if you can, share my podcast with someone else who likes facts and details without the judgment of being biased. One of the big things that I'm bringing into this year is to reiterate we like facts and details and just listen, hosted by George, not opinions like the mainstream media is doing, because that's why a lot of my podcasts are directed at giving you facts that you're not hearing from any other mainstream source with limited opinion. And I'll talk about that a little bit when I say something that I think is a little bit opinionated. So that is our contract. That's what I'm going to do. And that's what I'm offering people who listen to my podcast. Okay. So today we want to talk about U.S. federal government policy on public safety and crime. So let's dig in. As we know, when the Trump administration got elected and sworn in on January 20th, there were some changes made. Now, let me jump into something that I think is interesting. Over past several years, when presidents do public safety and crime, it is either characterized as federal government policy on these things like safety and crime, or occasionally, for example, with the last administration, they would say Biden administration. Administration is a group of people. Now, I'm saying that because right out of the gates, everything seems to be directed at President Donald Trump. So in this issue, it's like that too. So when I was looking it up, it said Trump's policy. Well, it's not just President Trump's policy, it's U.S. government policy because he is the president of the United States and he enforces the laws in the country. Now, so the aspects of the federal government policy currently on public safety and crime is law enforcement and policing, empowering and protecting the police. Policies focus on unleashing law enforcement, enhancing protections, and making it harder to hold officers accountable for misconduct through measures like boosting qualified immunity and criminalize the publication of identifying information about officers. Now, that has become very important when it is applied to ICE agents currently who are conducting law enforcement actions in two or three states. It's not nationwide like the mainstream media would like you to think or to sway you that it's a national problem. Okay, and you can check me out on that. If you look at it, currently it's in Minnesota, Illinois, it was in the District of Columbia, and briefly in California, but they got out of there, and Oregon. That's not nationwide. So, and that's a fact. That's where it's currently happening at. But enforcing the policies is what they're doing in this in under this one. Uh, the they have increased the provision of surplus military assets and equipment to state and local law enforcement agencies. That's to deal with the current issues that are going on with violent protesters. So there's people who are peacefully demonstrating. I like demonstrating more because that's more in line with they're out there, they disagree, and that's their right. So, protesters, that word has been weaponized with, well, violent protesting. So, that's why I like demonstrations better. All right. So there's been executive orders to assert federal control over local law enforcement in Washington, D.C. Now, according to the Constitution, the President of the United States is has federal control over the District of Columbia. So the City Council was allowed to exist, but they are more advisory. And so previously, when President Biden was president, the city council was trying to, for example, get them to decriminalize a lot of crimes that even President Biden refused to let them decriminalize. All right. So they're going to pull federal funding from districts of local prosecutors who implement reform policies such as cashless bail system. Okay, so that's the connection with Illinois and this cashless bail. Now, if we look at Illinois, for example, and I've talked about Illinois a little bit, this cashless bail is very, very complicated because what you want to do is you want to make sure that people aren't going to be released and then go back and do crimes. And there are certain crimes like uh, uh, um, beating up a spouse and stuff like that, that people shouldn't be back out if they have done that. Domestic violence. Couldn't think of the word at first. So those are the types of things that the federal government is trying to work with state and local agencies and say, hey, we're going to pull the funding if you don't keep it fair for safety reasons. All right. So that gives you a flavor of that portion of it. Now, there's some other ones, but the writing is a little biased. So, all right. So let's go to something that you're probably not aware of. Let's look at prison conditions. And would it surprise you to know that the executive order that applied to the Bureau of Prisons is as stated below. So what that executive order is defending women from gender ideology, extremism, and restoring biological truth to the federal government. That's what is termed at this executive order. Now, I'm not going to go through all of it, but there's two key things that I want to mention to you. Now, the first one is halt of gender affirming care funding. It prohibits the use of federal funds for gender affirming medical treatments, such as hormone therapy and surgeries within federal prisons. Now, one slight opinion here. I am a moderate Republican. I do not care if somebody thinks that they should be a man who thinks that they should be a woman. Where we're running into problems on, and I think most moderate Republicans feel this way, is who's funding it. The federal government should not be funding with taxpayer dollars gender affirming medical treatments. If it's done by the private sector, and I would challenge the other side to start giving grants, private money to get this done, moderate Republicans wouldn't challenge it because they believe in people's rights to do things, but they don't believe that the federal government should be funding it. Okay, now the other one is housing based on biological sex. Now, you would think that this wouldn't be an issue. The order mandates that individuals in federal custody be housed in facilities according to their sex assigned at birth rather than their gender identity. Okay, we had to make an executive order, the federal government did, because of this. Well, why would a biological male want to be in prison with females? And why do they think that the females wouldn't feel like that individual should not be there? It would have made more sense if they were housed separately. They can either be housed separately in just an area that's genderless, basically, and then you let people who want to live together under that circumstance do that. But we had to pass a law to keep people from saying, well, I identify as a female, so I want to be housed with the women. We can't do that because it violates women's rights. And that last part is my opinion. I think that that violates their rights. And the law says, or the executive order says now that you cannot do that. Now, this is in prisons. Why are we so heavily involved in the politics of prison that we had to get involved to defend women who are incarcerated and the gender affirming care that was done in the military with taxpayer dollars and in the prisons? Now, the prison one I wasn't even aware of until I did the research and found this one. So, the other thing is drug policy. So, the permanent classification of all fentanyl related substances is Schedule 1 drugs. And so, when things are in Schedule 1 drugs, there are harsher mandatory minimums for that. Okay. They also have prioritized the mass deportations of criminal illegal aliens and designated international cartels as foreign terrorist organization. And again, this is U.S. federal government policy. That's tied to the policy of an administration and this government. It's not tied to Trump personally. He is the president, but the policy is vested in the office, not in an individual. Okay. So there's also the First Step Act, which was applauded in 2018. Because if you will remember, you watched the news and they were did criminal reform. Okay, so the administration and the federal government is looking at tightening up some of that legislation. But my own personal opinion is it's never going to be changed as part of the federal law. So that part is going to stay the same, but they're still talking about it because the U.S. federal government currently is trying to get tough on crime. So here we are again, and it is 2016, and the policy and the laws are in place to make it safer for American citizens and taxpayers who want to be safe in these cities and in these towns. And the big takeaway from the podcast is this is American policy. As I've stated twice now, this isn't Trump only policy. And the mainstream media, I believe, should report it as that. And the question for all Americans is, do we feel safer now than we did a year ago? This is Just Listen, hosted by George. Let me know what you think.